Apparently, the Washington Commanders are among a handful of teams actively looking to add a wide receiver and some talent to the wide receiver room at the trade deadline. Dan Graziano, ESPN insider, and a guy who's always had inside information when it comes to the NFC East, talks about the Cowboys, the Commanders, among the few teams that are actively looking to add a wide receiver. Devonte Adams, Deontay Johnson. Let's talk about it. Per ESPN, NFL insider, and a guy who's covered the NFC East very close for quite some time, Dan Graziano says the Cowboys, Chiefs, Los Angeles Rams, and Washington Commanders would all love to add a talented wide receiver by the deadline. He says the Chiefs and Rams are obvious candidates to have interest in a wide receiver, of course, with Hollywood Brown's out for the year injury and Puka Nakua's in Los Angeles. But according to Graziano, the Cowboys and Commanders, it has nothing to do with injury issues, obviously, since we know here in Washington. They just want to add some talent to the room. CD is in a bare cupboard wide receiver room in Dallas, and it says under new offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury, there's been a lot left to be desired from the wide receiver position. The two top receivers so far are Austin Eckler and Zach Ertz, and we know there's a multitude of reasons why we have not been able to give Terry McLaurin the ball too much, and he has 39 yards over the first 2 weeks of the season. Some of that is Jaden not seeing it yet, the game not slowing down for him enough, and like I mentioned on my live stream last night, there's a lot of usage as Terry as a decoy in this offense. For whatever reason, Cliff Kingsbury has Terry running a lot of dummy routes where he's not the primary target or a real legit target on the play. He's kind of just out there, and Washington wants to add to that wide receiver room. So here to fan the flames from earlier this offseason when Mina Kimes said, I could see Washington trading for Devonte Adams before the deadline this year. And she sounded very confident when she did so. And then there was that BS report over the summertime by some bullshit-ass publication saying Washington is going to trade for Tay Adams by the deadline. That's interesting. And these are the two names that he throws out when he says the closest receivers he can link to these situations are Devonte Adams and Deontay Johnson based on the team's situation where they're currently at. Devonte Adams plays for a team quarterbacked by Gardner Minshew. And while they won the game versus the Baltimore Ravens over the weekend, that doesn't look like the most advantageous spot for Devonte Adams to be in. And you might say, but why would a rookie quarterback? Man, come on now. Jaden Daniels is immensely talented. And at some point this year, he's going to start frying with his right arms. And that Raiders team politicked and threw ass to get Jaden Daniels down to Vegas all summer. So Devonte Adams would clearly be interested in playing football for Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders, even though he said we're a pitiful fan base that has nothing to love, and a little bit in some ways he is correct. Then there's Deontay Johnson, his situation in Carolina. The quarterback gets benched. It is now Andy Dalton's season. I would prefer, if we were to actually make a move for a receiver, that it's a clear-cut, bona fide number one. Deontay Johnson is number one by default in Carolina, because it's old man Thielen and a bunch of meh over there. Maybe Xavier Leggett eventually takes over as their number one. But I would prefer we can do better than that. Our wide receiver room is a bunch of guys that are probably the number 3 or the number 4 or worse on most rosters, and Terry McLaurin, who's a number 1 receiver here. Who knows what he is based league-wide, but if we're going to trade for a wide receiver, shoot for the stars, shoot for the moon, and shoot for a guy who had over 100 yards and a touchdown in week 2, which is Devonte Adams, who even on teams with bad and meh quarterback play, he still gets it done. Last year, shit quarterback play from Jimmy Garoppolo and Aiden O'Connell still gave you 103 catches, 1,144 yards, and 8 touchdowns. First year with the Raiders when he left Aaron Rodgers with Derek Carr, 100 catches, 1,500 yards, 14 touchdowns, and his contract is not too crazy over the next couple years. So those are two targets you want to keep your eye on if Washington actually gets in the trade mix for one of these players. But pay attention to any wide receiver situations that are in flux at the moment. Maybe the Bengals with T. Higgins. He's probably going to make his debut versus Washington on Monday night. They are going to have to let him walk for free as an unrestricted free agent after not coming to a long-term deal with him after the franchise tag. They're not going to franchise a wide receiver again, especially not after they're going to have to sign a full long-term deal with Jamar Chase this offseason. So I would say keep your eyes on a guy like T. Higgins, keep your eyes on a guy like Devonte Adams, and Carolina's Deontay Johnson might be fighting for his life over there. It probably gets better for them when Andy Dalton gets in the game because he's at least an experienced vet who's going to get the ball to the receiver. He's not going to throw for 80 yards in an NFL football game. Poor Bryce, and poor any quarterback that gets drafted into new Dan Snyder. The Carolina Panthers have it as bad as anybody right now because not only is Dave Tepper Dan Snyder-like, he's so much richer and so much more powerful and has more reach and connections than Snyder. So just imagine the damage Snyder could have done if he was actually rich, and all his net worth did not fully come from the football team. Yikes, prayers for the Panthers, but the torch had to be passed for a bad team. But what are your thoughts? Washington getting in the mix to trade for a wide receiver. I know we need cornerback help. I know we need a few things on this roster, but certain positions don't grow on trees, man. Wide receivers become available much quicker than cornerbacks become available in this league. And I'm sure if there were number one corners or number two corners just available for trade as of September 20th, Washington would be in the mix and in the conversation for those guys. But wide receiver is something that comes up in the mix around the trade deadline every year. Who is your target? If Washington was to add a wide receiver to this team, who would it be? And how would you feel if Washington acquired a player among the likes of Devonte Adams? To be perfectly honest, if we acquired Adams, I would not give a fuck that he said our fan base was miserable, that he said our stadium was pitiful, because he's correct on both accounts in a way. But I would not care about any of those comments if we traded for Devonte Adams, if I'm keeping it a whole buck with you. We'll see. We'll see if Adam Peters is a buyer or a seller at the deadline, because you know the name everybody's going to mention when you hear the words Washington Commanders trade is Jonathan Allen, especially considering we've got very minimal production in the first couple weeks, and we're finally ramping up first-year, second-round pick Johnny Newton to take over at one of those tackle spots, with Payne and Allen a combined $45 million cap hit, and Payne being the much younger guy. Jonathan Allen would be the expendable one on our roster. So we got things to monitor as the trade deadline approaches in 2024. November 5th, 2024. November 5th, 2024 is going to be your trade deadline date. So we got about a month and some change to monitor. Let me know in the comments which players you'll be following and which players Washington should be seeking out in a trade. I've seen a lot of people in the chat and in the comments mentioning Marshawn Lattimore in New Orleans. I haven't seen anything about him requesting a trade or wanting out of New Orleans, especially now considering those guys are actually turning up. But you know, guys want their money. So maybe there's something fans saw that I was not able to see yet. But Tay Adams posts some cryptic shit on his story or on his Instagram like every other night. The captions, you know, he's always moving like a wide receiver moves. And I wouldn't be mad if we made a trade for a guy like Tay Adams, because if we could stop all these stupid ass debates and conversations and have a two-headed wide receiver monster of Tay Adams and Terry McLaurin, and Tay Adams would be your primary bona fide number one, and that would make Terry a high-end number two receiver, and that would open up so many opportunities for him and this offense. And I'm never going to turn down weapons for Jaden Daniels, whether it's an older receiver, a younger receiver. I'm here for it. And I'm never going to say we should not be looking at the trade deadline. For a team looking to establish an identity, a team looking to see exactly what we have in 2024, Washington should be looking to be buyers and sellers at the upcoming trade deadline of November 5th, 2024. Just reporting to y'all what Dan Graziano of ESPN reported. It was an article Adam Wells put out on Bleacher Report app today. Shout out to Bleacher Report, by the way. Washington's number one receivers through week 1 are Austin Eckler and Zach Ertz. And that is not a good thing. And there are a multitude of reasons as to why that's the case. But adding another receiver to this room, I ain't mad at it at all, because Noah Brown just got here a couple weeks ago, and that's our leading wide receiver through 2 weeks. Say about that what you will. That's all I got for right now. Game preview coming up at 1 p.m. on the channel with Zim from Cincinnati Podcast. We got a lot to talk about. Hail to the Washington Commanders. Rep that burgundy and gold to the death of you. And let me know in the comments who you're looking out for by the trade deadline. Deuces.